Hello everyone, my name is Gilbert Renaud. I live in Vancouver, Canada. I have a background in dance, massage therapist, and then I became naturopath in Quebec in 1988. And then in 1991 I started to study the work of Dr. Hammer. At the time I worked as naturopath in an acupuncture clinic in Quebec, and I've created an institute of naturopathy, and we gave the class to students. And then, at the same time, I studied the work of Dr. Hammer, and I tried to apply that with my clients. And I was not very good because I didn't learn with accuracy at the beginning. But I studied the work of Dr. Hammer, and that was fantastic what I discovered. And when I explain recalling total biology or Biologika or GNM, I always like to start that my story started with the study of Dr. Hammer. And we know in August 78, his son, 19 years old, got shot and fatally wounded. And then for 3 months, Dr. Hammer was an excellent internist, doctor. He tried to save his son's life. And eventually his son will die on December 7th of the same year. And Dr. Hammer, who has never been ill in his life, was fantastic structure. He was very shocked by the death of his son and had difficulty to go over it. And eventually, 2 months later, after the death of his son, he will be diagnosed with a testicular cancer. And he could understand that he had cancer following the death of his son, but he didn't understand the logic that he had studied behind cancer, that he had cancer at this moment of his life, so quick after the death of his son. And so he will spend the next months of his life to research why he had that at that moment, and he will make some research on other clients in that hospital who have also testicular cancer. He will study women with ovarian cancer, and he will realize that all of them develop their cancer following an important loss. Eventually, he will make a connection with the brain, the neuronal relay of the brain, and he will identify a focus in the brain in touch with the ovary or the testicle and with the conflict of loss. That will be the beginning of his discovery. It's interesting because Dr. Hammer, when he got diagnosed, he accepted to have a slight removal of the testicle, slight removal of the tumor on his testicle, and he didn't want to have any chemotherapy or radiation. And all his colleagues said, Hammer, you're crazy, you will die inside of a year. You have no more chance than 20% of survival. And he rejected that, and he went on. And as he researched and as he discovered, he reached his healing by making the connection that what happened to him through the death of his son allowed him to discover a fantastic system with what he can help other people in life. That's his way that he has resolved the conflict of the loss of his son. His wife was not so fortunate because she would die eventually from other conditions. And then Dr. Hammer made a terrific work, and finally, at the end, 5 years later, he came up with a fantastic system called German New Medicine, where he has elaborated the conflict behind most of cancer types. And then he, for example, on the chart, he has the type of cancer, the type of conflict, the area of the brain that will record the Hammer focus. He will also have an area where he talks about the symptoms that we can observe during the conflict active phase of an illness and the symptoms we can observe in the repair phase of an illness. Anyway, in that chart, it was fantastic, and it has been studied by many doctors in Europe about in 83, 84, 85, 86. And Dr. Saba, my mentor, was one of his students. At the time, many of these doctors were free to attend Dr. Hammer's classes, but there's a moment, many of these doctors have been warned by their medical corporation to stop to study such knowledge, because that was not appropriate regarding what they have studied in university. Anyway, following that, Dr. Sabat came back to his medical practice in Marseille, and Dr. Sabat made his thesis in medicine on the microcancer of the breast. And then he created emergency medicine in Marseille. For 20 years, he will work with people at home. He will visit people in their daily life. He will be a doctor that is effective on the daily life of the people. So when he discovered the work of Dr. Hammer, he applied it right away in his practice, and he had terrific results with that. Over the next years, he would discover that some people, they never healed. Some people healed, and they never came back with illness. Some people healed, but they came back later with the same illness. And some, it never worked. So Dr. Sabat will pay the next 5-7 years of his life to optimize what he studied with Dr. Hammer. It does not deny of the work of Dr. Hammer, but for him, that was his way to optimize something, to make its own, to make the system more effective to him. And eventually, years later, Dr. Sabat would have integrated 2-3 different systems. So, for example, I will go through this system with you. For example, the first thing that we do in total biology, we explain the rocket. This rocket is the basis that we need to know. For example, today when I have a client, I always explain that rocket, and quite often the client heals on that. It's a demonstration that brings out of any doubt that the disease of the client comes from the client himself. And that demonstration is vital because it gives a chance to the person not to research outside of himself in order to find a solution. So that rocket has 3 levels. The top of that rocket is the psyche. In the psyche, you have emotions, thought, decision, belief, religion. We put everything that we use to resolve our daily life problem. And then you have the middle level, it's called the automatic brain. That brain that just knows one thing is to keep us alive from moment to moment. And that brain is never wrong. For example, the automatic brain is a computer of the 15th generation. NASA computers are from the 4th or the 5th generation. I talk about the brain because Dr. Sabat was an expert of the brain. 15th generation means the brain makes calculation from the past on the past, the past on the present, the past on the future, the present on the past, the present on the present, the present on the future on the past, the future on the present, the future on the future. And the brain just wants to provide the solution on the moment to moment that is the best solution. This is why we say the brain is never wrong. And then for that brain, in order to be alert, that brain suspects that at any second a predator can jump on us. And then the lower level is a body made of a group of organs and billions of cells at the service of the brain. Nothing happens in the body without the agreement of the brain. But we can always accept a percentage of exception, like exposure to radiation, eating poison, or a threat from the outside, like a car accident. But even the car accident comes at that moment in my life, not by accident. So we can find that. So now the interest is, for the automatic brain, the person has to stay alert in his mind. And if I experience a conflict that makes me feeling overwhelmed, and I'm so overwhelmed that I don't pay attention to the threat in my daily life, my brain can't tolerate that the whole energy of the body is in the mind, which does not allow me to see the predator coming on me. And for example, in 2012, the predator is the car that's coming on me, or someone that wants to hurt me. So from that moment, my brain says, you're too stuck and too overwhelmed with the problem in your mind. So overnight, my brain steps in my psyche, downloads the core of the conflict into the subconscious. And when my brain stores the conflict into the subconscious, it needs to store it in the corresponding body part with the conflict. So the moment the brain downloads the core of the conflict from my consciousness to my subconsciousness and stores it into the corresponding body part, I wake up the day after. I still remember my conflict, I still remember my problem, but I have forgotten how much I suffered at the moment of the conflict. So it's like if it creates an attenuation of the conflict in my mind, in my conscious mind, at the price of an illness in the body. But at first, that illness in my body takes just 1%. Yes, but the night before, I had 75% of the conflict in my mind, and at the moment of the download, my brain keeps just 25%, which allows myself to see clearer in my life, and then I can see much clearer when I cross the street or when I drive my car. I create no harm to others or to myself. So for that, we say at first, the disease is always the brain's best solution to keep the person alive as long as possible. So you can use a rocket. That's what Dr. Sabah explains. He always explains that to everybody because just explaining that, it helps the person to realize that maybe my condition is the fruit of something that I've experienced in my life that I felt overwhelmed with. And it's one of the best systems that I know to help the person to become consciously aware of that. So that is constantly present in the work of Dr. Hammer, Total Biology, Dr. Sabah and Total Biology. And then now we have to say, what in the world the person experienced in his psyche to force the brain to produce the condition in the body? So what did the person experience in his psyche? Because you ask the right question, you might find the right answer. Right? So if you find eczema in the body, you find in the psyche conflict of simple separation. You find psoriasis in the body, you find in the psyche conflict of double separation from people. Okay? So endlessly, you can play like that. And then when you make the right connection, you have the chance to discover what really happened in the person. So now, when the conflict is in the subconscious, the person forgets about his conflict progressively, and then the art of the therapist in Total Biology is to help the clients to remember that. And then for that, we have a piece of work that Dr. Sabah has elaborated. The first thing is the lifetime line. That means if I have a disease at 50 years old and I'm diagnosed with stomach cancer, normally a little bit before my stomach cancer, within a year before, I discover the cause of my stomach cancer, normally. And quite often, the drama that happened around 50 years old that has produced stomach cancer is linked also with a lifetime line. For example, what we do in Total Biology, we take the moment of the drama that produced stomach cancer and we divide by 2. We get to 25 years old, and at 25, normally we find something similar to what happened at 50. And then 12 and a half, 6 and a quarter. And we realize that what happened at 50 is linked with something that has been always there in the back of my mind, in the back burner, but that was never triggered enough to produce the condition. Because the condition that shows up today in the here and now is never by accident as well. So Dr. Sabah has integrated the lifetime line as a basis of research. Sometimes we use the cycle of dividing by 2, by 3, by 4, by 5. Anyway, the brain has an holographic memory of what happened in the past. This is why you divide today by any number until 5. All the cycles that you will discover earlier, you might find something that has a meaning to the condition today. And if it doesn't matter, you keep researching. It's just to give you a chance to explore the previous cycle of the person's life. That is fundamental. And then For example, when Dr. Sabah studied German New Medicine, you research just the year before, the cycle anniversary before. Since then, GNM has also evolved. They go further back. But in the beginning of the 80s, it was forbidden to go more than a year back, as far as I know. And then, what is fundamental, we're in biology. And in biology, we have our parents, dad and mom. So most people never ask, who are you? And I am me, yes, but I also have a father and a mother. And Dr. Sabah, when he researched all this stuff, he was also that emergency doctor visiting people at home. And he made many connections with the disease of children and with what the parents have experienced during the pregnancy. And then that is the second system that he has integrated with the help of another scientist called Marc Fréchette. You call that the program purpose or the project purpose. The project purpose is a period of time that starts 9 months prior conception. Our parents experience an ambience. And then there's a moment of conception. In biology, the parents are not God, but they are like God. When they create a child, it's an act of God. And then they pass what they are at that moment. And it creates a template, the template of conception based on what dad and mom are. And then mom is pregnant. Is she happy to be pregnant? When she tells daddy that she's pregnant, is he happy to be pregnant? Does he make her feel good or feel bad? All that will have an impact. The 9 months of pregnancy are important. And then birth. Am I expected as a boy or a girl? Is daddy happy that I'm a boy or a girl? Okay. That is capital. And then the first year of my life. During that period, it's a period of 30 months. The whole system, we call that the project purpose. During that time, we say the psychological and emotional conflicts of the parents become the biological conflicts of the child. Why? Because if my parents die, I die. But if my mother experiences an overwhelming conflict and it's downloaded in my baby's brain under the form of a memory, my mother is free from the burden, and then she can take care of me. This is why in all families, and you see that sometimes, when the baby is there and the parents have an argument in the kitchen, the children after that has a bronchitis. He's in the repair phase of the conflict that the parents had in the kitchen. Okay? So now, the project purpose is fundamental in this work. Okay? And the project purpose, you imagine when mom is pregnant, the psychological emotional conflict of the parents is downloaded in the baby's brain or under the form of a memory. That doesn't mean the baby will be ill with this conflict, but it will be a programming. And if that baby meets such a trigger in his life later, he might activate the illness that was programmed during the project purpose. So that is from total biology, from the work of Dr. Sabah. And then what is fundamental, we have dad and mom, we have grandparents, great-grandparents. Dr. Sabah in total biology has integrated the work of Anne Schutzenberger, who wrote a book that is fantastic to read. It's called The Ancestor Syndrome. Madame Schutzenberger was a psychoanalyst that she studied in the School of the Mind in Palo Alto, California. But she's a French woman. And then for 42 years she sat down in her laboratory, in her office with her clients. Many clients came with all kinds of diseases. And she built family tree for 3 generations above. And as we built a family tree, we discovered that an ancestor died with the same type of cancer that I have now. As I discovered that, I healed from my cancer. Because that cancer that I have right now is the memory of the unresolved conflict of my ancestor. So from the moment I become aware of that, my brain says, oh, it's not you. Oh, finish. I don't have to carry on that memory anymore. So this is why that woman has observed that for 42 years. And then even more. This woman today is 94 years old. 2 years ago, at 92, she published a book, The Joy of Life. And she has very good chi in life. She's still very well alive. And then it's fantastic. So in total biology, we integrate the family tree, the project purpose, and the life timeline. It's like if at the moment the person comes to see you with a disease, a diagnosis, you say, okay, great, let's work. You find the conflict today, and then you find a story in his life, in his parents, what happened to the parents during the project purpose that might be in touch with my disease today. And then we find also something, sometimes with something that happened in the family tree. The combination of these three produces in my consciousness an evidence. I realize that it's not my problem. And many people heal on that, heal on the evidence that is not mine. Why it's so important? Because at the project purpose, until 1 year old, I record the problem of my parents as me. And if you see the brain of a child needs to see the problem that has been recorded, like if they are me, so I never blame my parents for that. This is why for all children of the world, every time something happens tragic, they take the blame. You have the proof in molestation, rape, incest of children, they're always feeling that is their fault. So children feel guilty, devalued, so later in life, this cycle is repeated, and every time I have something in my subconscious, I think it's me. I think I deserve it, I think it's my fault. It's one of the reasons why people do not heal later. This is why when you do the work, you integrate the work of total biology to German New Medicine, to Biologika, you upgrade your chance to help your clients. And curiously, when you do this work, we rarely see an important hammer focus in repair with an overwhelming repair phase. You know why? Because it's the evidence. You don't need to have such a big symptoms of healing when you have the evidence. And it has been demonstrated many times by Dr. Sabah and many of his students. You know, I do this work for 20 years. I can say that I've noticed in 20 times a hammer focus that has been maybe a little bit challenging. No more than that. It's like that when you have the evidence. But you never lose track of what we learn in German New Medicine because it's the basis, it's a cornerstone. And in total biology, we honor the work of Dr. Hammer. It's very important to say that. And then now, another symbol that is very important is the iceberg. Dr. Sabah compares a human being as an iceberg. The symptom shows up in the tip of the iceberg, and the story is below the surface, above the appearances. And the iceberg is the life timeline, the project purpose, and the family tree. So it's another way to present the work of Dr. Sabah with the iceberg. As we explore the iceberg, the life timeline, project purpose, and family tree, we build a puzzle. And sometimes we don't know exactly what we will discover. But as we build a puzzle, you write everything down. And as you go forward, sometimes the person forgets about his symptoms. And sometimes the person has healed completely, but we don't know exactly where the person is healed. Because when the evidence is strong enough, it makes tilt in the mind of the person, and the person basculates toward healing, and you cannot even stop the healing. And at the time, one of the big differences between the work that Dr. Sabah did with the work of Dr. Hammer is Dr. Sabah has learned in German New Medicine that you quit all medication, especially chemotherapy, radiation. And Dr. Sabah at the time knew that as a doctor, if he recommends his client not to have chemotherapy or radiation, it would be right away eliminated by the medical corporation there. So Dr. Sabah said, let's work on the conflict. If the person has to heal with or without chemotherapy, he's going to heal anyway. So, and Dr. Sabah, over 7 years of intensive work, he built 1,000 cases, cornerstone from A to Z with proof at the beginning, at the end of illness. When Dr. Sabah developed his system, he teaches that in 16 days, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. You're not allowed to talk, to ask questions, you just listen to him. He's an expert of the brain. He just asks us to listen. And all the students, sometimes we're 200 in a class, he tells a story, he tells the story of his clients, and then people listen to that, and everybody in the class goes through their own life story. And everybody that you become aware, everything that you become aware of does not return as destiny. It's one of the best therapy that you can have, is to attend a workshop in total biology with Dr. Sabah. Today, Dr. Sabah is not available anymore, but you have some other people who teach total biology. Me, I teach a combination of total biology that I call recall healing. It's the same thing. When people just listen in the class without asking too many questions, it's amazing what comes to their mind. And then it's like if you have 2-3 sessions, just being in a class, listening to the class. And I remember when I did the workshop with Dr. Sabah, I did 7 times, 16 days. And if I had a chance to sit down in his class, the first workshop, I would do it again, because it's in the beginning that you understand everything. It's super. And it's the same thing, if you have a chance to go to sit down in a class that you have like from German medicine, you would get so many things, you will make so many connections. That is vital to do that from time to time, because it brings you back to the base. And then the danger is when you become comfortable with that and you think that every case works the same way. But every case is unique. And we need to keep that in mind when we work with clients. And this is the message of Dr. Sabah. Stay focused on one-on-one and pay attention to his story. For that, we need to be able to listen to the story of the client. We need to be able to help the person to build a puzzle, life timeline, project purpose, and family tree. And as we do that, there's quite often the first beneficial of that, the person stops to be stressed of dying because the person understands why he is ill. As we work on that, the person processes his conflict of the diagnosis. That is quite often the reason why the person does not heal. So we process the conflict of the diagnosis. It's important because Dr. Hammer said the conflict of diagnosis is the worst conflict at the surface of the planet, because it's responsible of 90% of the diseases and 100% of the aggravation. Even it is said that the conflict of the diagnosis multiplied by 1,000 the gravity of the disease. So that means we need to pay attention. This is why Dr. Sabah mentions quite often Dr. Hammer, and he asks us at the first session to break the conflict of the diagnosis. It's more important than the primary conflict, because the diagnosis creates a shield around the focus of the primary conflict in the brain. And it does not allow the person to heal. So this is why you never lose time to process the diagnosis.